Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. What up?
Hello.
We're live.
It's Wednesday afternoon
with the Horticulture podcast. We're in another rare form today, so who knows what jokes.
A lot of caffeine consumption.
There's a lot of
caffeinated teas.
I think of our
coffees of all flavors and
Good.
nationalities. Yes.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
In
there
some
he
ways.
is, starting it off.
Here we go.
Give you something
and
to chew
we're
on,
back. But
Ruminate.
why does ruminate is a weird word to me?
That's the related
to me.
to
I
it,
think
like
I think
chewing
of
the cud
ruminants,
kinda.
and I'm just is that
Yeah.
oh okay
chewing
so
it's like-
Connotation in a different form.
Chewing the cud is they kind of
Put it down
barf
below,
it
bring
into
it
their
back
mouth
up,
and chew
put
it
down
again
below,
and
bring
swallow
it
it.
back up.
right.
Redigesting.
Oh, okay. I was always like, it's like I knew what
This took
that
a
meant,
turn.
but I didn't realize why it
Like the
was
connection.
related.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you do. We
Look
are
at us all
full
learning
of tidbits
things
today. We are full of
about
tidbits.
livestock. Can you tell
Mhm.
I'm a plant person?
I mean, to me, it seems intuitive because I eat my
Kind of
problems.
feeling you
Ah.
can eat it.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Brett was eating some chips on here earlier, and I don't know if I've been more jealous.
Well, you've had like
In my
pie
life
and
about
like
anything.
not today, but on previous episodes, you've had
Down
pie
there.
and like
Croissant.
beer cheese, and then you claimed that you didn't have beer cheese. Do you all remember it?
I
Was it
didn't have
pimento
beer
cheese?
cheese. Hummus, I probably had.
Pimento
I
cheese,
remember
that.
maybe.
But it's some
Pimento
kind of cheese
There's
Yeah, I
product.
something
have
about
pimento
justice
cheese.
or
Yeah.
fairness in envy and jealousy.
It's
You
like
know,
walking to a vineyard.
they have
that's
something
full
I
of
don't
charcuterie.
have.
It's usually food related too. Like when I think about all the things I'm ever jealous of, it's
Oh.
good food
Yeah, I
that I
had
see
some-
that people have.
Had some ghost
Right,
pepper
right.
chips.
Which I
Finer
guess,
things.
They weren't very. Yeah, I mean, if I'm
no,
being
too much.
heat level, they were like low level. And I'm not one of
They're
those people
not
that's
that
like, oh, I'm really tough
spicy.
about
It
eating
was-
spicy stuff.
No.
They were like not that spicy, which I was glad about, because if they had been actual ghost pepper level, I would have not been able to eat them. And
Brett, do you like the spice to
No,
be to a
not
point
really.
where like you're sweating while
Well,
you're eating?
for me,
Some people-
sweating
Maybe
while
a
I'm
general
eating is
damp
basically
with-
just like a bowl of cereal.
Unless that picnic's
Yeah.
in the sun.
Bowl of cereal,
Like
I can have
ice
a nice
cream,
steady drip.
It doesn't
Right.
matter. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Glass of milk. Break
Unless
it out.
I'm enjoying it so much
But I
that
don't
I'm
enjoy
sweating,
discomfort
everything
in
else
the
is
spice.
inappropriate. Okay.
It's nice accent.
No.
Okay.
Pain is pain.
Mm.
There's no gain.
Yeah.
I asked because that my dad always said like it's spicy enough when my head starts to sweat,
Mm-mm.
and I always thought that was weird. And then I thought I'm gonna tell that story one day at his funeral, and then I thought, am I the
No.
only person who thinks about stories they're gonna say at people's
Right?
funerals?
For Josh, it's
All
more
the
of like an
time.
airing of
All the time.
grievances.
In general.
Yes. It's more of a
I'm
last
thinking about
testament to
your
their
funeral right
personal.
now.
Where's my pen?
On another podcast, maybe our
And it starts
holiday
out with
podcast.
"Let it be known, let it be known."
We'll do an airing of. I think that should be a theme: airing of your grievances. Seinfeld theme for
Like a
like
Festivus
airing
sort
of
of
your
thing.
plant. Yeah, Festivus for the rest of us.
No
Ray,
soup
do you
for you.
remember when Boyle County did that? I won't go into that story.
I
but,
do. That was it had a lot of personality to that
Yeah,
session.
yeah. Well, everybody
Seinfeld
was dressed
was
as like
very-
their favorite Christmas movie or whatever, and
Christmassy
so
theme.
Charlie Brown was there. Ray, did you guys do the Grinch? I don't.
Yeah, we did a whole Christmas.
Everybody
kind of-
was dressed up, and Boyle County all came wearing black, and we put like a pole upon our table. The Festivus for the.
I didn't know where that was going, to be honest. Did not know where that was going.
It was a good time. It was a good
Yeah,
time.
that
But
was
anyways,
fun. Yeah.
Back to today and the podcast that we talk about plants and all that cool stuff. Wanted to open up our mailbag for this because we always say, let us know. Tell us how we're doing. Tell us what you want to see in the
Do you
future.
have
And
any,
here's proof that
impressions
we
of
actually
Steve
do
from
that. So
Blue's Clues when it's mail time? No.
Mm.
Yeah, well, I don't
Well,
want to get
no,
copyright,
you do, because we've got
copyright
this.
struck. It's the mail.
It's gonna
It
be
never
so
fails.
accurate.
Makes me want to
that's
wag
that's my
tail.
best mailbox.
I liked it. It was
That was my best Blue's Clues.
the blue makeup that you put on for that does not
I
seem
thought a
worth
bee
it.
was
but-
after you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Production value was good.
Listen,
But delivery, not
I
so
go hard
much.
for the
The
pot.
mailbag is
I
open.
I go hard for the pot. It's important to me.
We got
Mailbag
mail.
is open. So if you have been listening to our podcasts, if you've particularly listened to the Mulch podcast, if you haven't, go back and listen to it. Do it. But anyways, this one is in relation to that. And so we had mentioned voles in the Mulch podcast. And this person is talking about how now that they live in Kentucky, they feel like they're in the vole epicenter, which in Boyle County we're the mole with an M epicenter. I get weekly calls on those, but voles are also something that's really bad. And they used a paper mulch in their garden, and it said it seemed to kind of open up this world. I love this, the world's vole convention. And they didn't come and they didn't leave, and so just let's talk through maybe quickly about just the vole dilemma that can come with mulch and maybe ways you guys have combated it.
Voles seem to be, I don't know, those years where we have a lot of snow, but you're probably going to have a lot of voles because they have cover and they kind of continue to reproduce under that cover. That's the worst years I've ever seen. We've gotten lots of calls in those years, but it's related to kind of if they have any kind of protection, like, grass, whatever, snow, whatever it tends to be that hides them from predators. You mulch in this case, you run the risk of hiding them from predators effectively, and they have a high reproductive rate. So you up your odds of having vole problems. And voles are different than moles. Voles kind of, you can recognize those. They run very close to the top of the ground. Their runs are, so you can sort of see where they go, whereas moles are under the ground, and they have different eating habits, of course, too. Moles are more like grubs and earthworms. Voles, unfortunately, are things like the bark off of your young fruit trees, or it's your tender bulbs. So they have different
They look
habits, and they create different
more
problems.
like mice too.
Like if there was a slider and
I've
on the
heard people
left
call
hand
them-
side was a mouse and on the right side was a mole, as you dragged the slider and it shifted, the midpoint somewhere would be like a vole, kind of.
Yeah, I've heard people
look
call them
like
field
a,
mice.
it's like
and
a
I'm like,
like a
that's
vole with like a platypus vibe.
They
I mean,
look
sorry,
very
they look like a
similar.
mouse with a platypus vibe, kind of. Little like, I don't know. This is weird. They're just
Yeah, a
weird
little
looking.
bit.
They kind of
They've got
freak me
I can
out.
see that. I can see
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but mulch can definitely cause problems, especially if you're using cardboard and laying things on top of it. They love to get under there. They're protected. They set up their mole conventions. You
Yeah.
turned up the
Pump up the
volume on
volume.
them.
Pump up the volume.
Just came up with that right there. Sorry.
The
Yeah,
volume.
exactly. So yeah, you create this situation where they can get away from the guys
It's another,
that eat them.
it's another
So that's
issue
where
with
we see most of the
excuse me,
problems
large
come
scale
from.
cover crop, no-till cover crop adoption is that when you roll down that rye or whatever wheat, whatever you may do, it does create a lot of vole habitat, which can then cause problems later and so it's, everything's a challenge. There's always balance there.
Yeah.
You were mentioning, Ray, in the small gravel in some of the commercial.
Yeah, these can be voles can be a huge problem because once again, orchards they can be a huge problem in commercial orchards or even at home with single fruit trees. But young fruit trees that have very tender bark, the voles are attracted to those. And orchards, you'll a lot of times see orchards, and I know our local orchards are all set up this way. They have learned over time to, number one, clean out the grass around the fruit trees, open it up to predators, and then you'll start to see things like hawks and owls swooping down, and that's a good thing in this instance. But they've also learned to put gravel. You'll see this strip of gravel with the fruit trees right in the middle down the rows, strip of gravel, fine crushed gravel. I forget the number on the gravel, but it's finer gravel. And that's a light color. And for some reason, the voles absolutely do not like that. They don't like to cross that, whether it's exposure to predators or they just don't like the texture. It really is a super effective way of protecting commercial orchards and fruit trees. And that's how they
So would
deal
you
with
all
the
say
problem.
that as
They
far
don't
as
think about
managing it
after that.
versus putting down mulch, I mean, part of the reason the voles like it is the same reasons that we like mulch, in that it keeps the ground cool, it can kind of increase root growth and other stuff like that. It's like, so it is a balancing act. I mean, is that the true story, or is there kind of like, is there a, we can fix, I would not encourage putting poisons down because of the ways that can bioaccumulate through the food chain. I don't know what the extension recommendation is for not yes or no on rodenticides.
It just depends. I mean, there are some specific products, but I think they're used very cautiously, and you need to work with someone like private lands wildlife biologist. If you have to go that route, if you're a commercial operation, there may be some options, but those are kind of a last ditch effort. We just don't use those willy nilly. That's not the first line of defense. The first line of defense is habitat modification. And if you're a homeowner, you really got to watch the use of and something that I enjoy using, like newspaper and cardboard, and then laying things on top of that as a mulch. That voles love that. And if you're having trouble with voles, you probably have to modify the way you're mulching and go with more of an open mulch or one that's not like a layer. That does help. It's the layering, but boy, they just get under there and set up a mold convention, as the reader outlined in his emailed us.
So I would say, as far as balancing act goes, you're probably gonna, in my opinion, gain more from mulch, whatever kind of mulch you're using. In my case, where I've had vole problems, it's been that black fabric, quote unquote, mulch, not necessarily just a wood mulch that they're underneath. But I think you're going to have more benefits from the mulch than you will have the destruction from the voles. There are some really cool, very easy, inexpensive traps that you can make that they will, just to kind of take care of them. So if you look up, homemade vole traps, you'll find a huge list of ways to do those. And if you can get rid of kind of those first ones and you can notice a problem early, you can take care of a lot of that. I'd also recommend outdoor cats. If you're in a larger like farming operation and not a homeowner, one really cool thing that just makes you sound cool is if you have raptor perches, which are essentially exactly what they sound like, where they're just areas where those owls, those hawks can come and kind of scout over your field and take care of those problems. And I have had some luck, and this is it's in an extension publications, but we don't give it a lot of weight. And the reason why is because sometimes it can work once and not work again. It can work for you and not your neighbor. There's just not, but it can work, and it's a pretty inexpensive thing to try, is capsaicin granules. And so those are, capsaicin pepper or whatever. And it's just these little granules that break down over about a 3-month period. And they don't like what it does to the soil, as far as, it just adds like a spice, for lack of a better term, that I'm thinking of right now, a spiciness to the soil. And I have had that work well in small areas, like a high tunnel, where I'm putting it along the edge of the tunnel to kind of keep them from coming in, and they're going to stay out somewhere else. I don't necessarily think it'll work for every situation or really large areas, but if you have a small area you're trying to keep them out of, using it as a barrier, I think can be an option. You can give it a shot. It's pretty inexpensive.
Do your corgis do anything with them? Like,
oh my god! Did I ever tell you the story about when Remy caught a vole?
No, but
okay.
They're little dogs and little rodents usually.
Yeah, so I have a little corgi. We use silage tarps on the farm, and voles love silage tarps. And you pull that up, and man, you see their runs underneath there. And so the cats will line up. We have barn cats, and they'll line up kind of around the silage tarp, and they'll snag things as they're coming out, freaking out and stuff. And one time, Remy, my little corgi, got into it with the cats, right? He's like excited. He's like hunting with them, and corgis are herding dogs. For those of you who don't know, they're not hunting dogs at all. They're not rat dogs or anything. They were not bred for that. But man, he snagged one of those voles coming out of there, swallowed it whole.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I was like, oh God. Because this is my dog that's allergic to chicken, and he just swallowed a vole whole.
Right.
Claws and all.
And I was like, this is not going to end well. So we watched him like really carefully for, about 24 hours and never had any
now
issues.
He's not allergic to chicken anymore.
Nice.
No, somehow he's not.
No,
but
he's not
that
allergic
goes
to
back
anything.
to the be careful what you use as far as poisons go. I believe from a homeowner perspective, I believe that nothing you all buy is something that will carry through to predators. But I believe those ones you have to have a commercial license to purchase. But
Phosphide type products, yeah.
but you still can have, other animals eat that you might not want to.
I did
so,
see the
directly,
agenda for
but-
the 2024 Mole Convention came out, or Vol Convention. Yeah, well, they're still looking for
Oh, yeah.
volunteers.
Is it?
Oh man! Oh, there he is.
We
He's
told you.
heating
We
up.
warned you, folks. Well, anyways,
For the rest of this episode, we're going to be throwing these things out. They're real words.
Well,
from this point
they're also
forward.
still, if
They're
you
real
guys are
words.
interested in
Real
maybe
words.
getting on the
we just-
program, there was a call for proposals as well.
Oh,
No, man.
Oh, God. Oh man.
We're all just shaking our head.
We're trying to think of things.
It's
with
I mean, it's
moles now.
impressive though.
I don't know.
It is
I don't know if
impressive.
I would go that far.
But anyway,
Repressive, regressive. What did you say? I misunderstood that.
I'm just
Impressive is that I haven't left yet.
I started it, and Brett is finishing it.
So let's jump to our topic for today.
Oh, we have a topic.
We do have a topic. It is not voles, but we are happy to talk about those. So if you guys have questions,
Yeah.
we always say shoot us one on via email, or if you're on Instagram, you can shoot us one on there. And if we don't already have a topic coming up about it, we will open up our mailbag.
very
Yeah, we
cool.
love those when you guys reach out like that and have specific, questions or comments. Love it when you guys have those.
But today we're going to talk about garden cleanup, because we're getting to the time of year where you should be, or hopefully are, and maybe you already are, because we talked about burnout already. So maybe you're already at that point. We're thinking about ending the season and the cleanup that goes along with it, why it's important, what to do. The last thing you want to do, especially when it's, cold outside, is clean up. And this is one of those do as I say,
and
not as I do kind of podcasts.
For home gardeners, I have a serious lead-in question here. Okay. Well, somewhat serious lead-in question, mainly for home gardeners, but this is a philosophical debate I have with myself every year as I'm trying to decide the course of my future at the end of my gardening season, and it is this. For you, dear listeners, please provide feedback. I would love that on this question. But towards the end of the garden season, when do you stop your garden? When the last tomato is bitten by the frost and shut down, or when you get absolutely sick of looking at it? When do you shut down your garden? I mean, these are things that I'm trying to make this decision now. I'm like, tomatoes, you're being very productive. I appreciate that, but enough. And I'm about to the point, and I feel a little guilty every time I do this. My garden is still somewhat productive out back, but I'm about
say,
to
Ray,
plow it under. I'm about to just mow it down.
If you look back on the course of your life and the many gardens you have gardened, would you say that you tend to have done one of those, the two options you gave, one of those more than the other?
Let's just say that I have bitten more gardens than the winter frost.
Oh, that was that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's just say that.
That did something for me.
I was ready for it. I mean, there comes a point, and mainly it's
really
and this
metal.
applies
Ray
to
Frost.
home gardeners. I know, because if you have a production garden, yeah, I like
Nice.
it. Jack, move over. I mean, I'm coming with the mower, baby. I'm coming. But I mean, it's tough, and we're lucky to have such a bounty, and these great varieties that are long season producers. Even though the days are getting shorter, they're still very productive. And if you do a good job and keep the diseases at bay for an appropriate amount of time, I mean, some of these things just kind of keep going. I'm like, quit showing off indeterminate tomatoes. I am sick of you, or green beans, or whatever the case. But yeah, I was talking with someone about that at the office the other day, and they're like, "No, we're sick of our garden. We've canned 400 cans of stuff, and we're done."
Yeah.
And we got into this whole discussion. I thought it was a great topic. I was like, "Yeah, come to think of it, I have mowed down a lot of semi-productive gardens that could have given more, but I have nothing left to give." So I
Oh,
give
yeah.
them rest in the form
Well,
of a
and there
mower.
there is
So
the limit usually for your capacity to can. Like, do you want
yes,
to go out and buy
freeze or
more
can.
jars every year, or
Yeah,
you filled
and
up your pantry? It's done.
and Alexis, I believe it was Alexis said something during the last podcast that we had. The way that she deals with her, and it hit deep in my heart, but I didn't say anything at the time. I was saving it. That the way she deals with certain problems in her operation is she just burns them to the ground, so she doesn't have to look at
Nice.
them. And that resonated with me like ringing a bell in the darkness. That resonated with me, people. It did. So yeah, Alexis, I am with you. So, yeah. Yeah. So
And I
that's
think,
garden cleanup.
exposure
I
to
started a little
commercial
early sometimes.
contexts helps be a little more ruthless, because there are times where it's just, if you either have
Mhm.
paid labor or you yourself are the labor, it's literally not worth going back through again to get that thing out. The amount of time that you're going to spend
Absolutely.
relative,
Yeah.
especially for something like green beans, where you can't just look. You got to kind of get in there and see,
Yeah.
and eventually it's like, okay.
I talked
Hmm.
with a producer that this morning. It was like the fourth picking, and it was bush beans, so they had to bend over, and that didn't excite them. But they were pretty decent little commercial opera. That was the exact discussion, Brett. Is they
Yeah.
said it's not worth their time because the rows were long and they had to move a long distance, and they just were mowing them down. They said, well, the average person would look and say, "Oh my gosh, there's all these
Yeah.
beans left." Not worth their time commercially to spend the time traversing that long distances just to get
And it is one of
a
those
diminished kind
times
of
too,
return
where
on their time.
sometimes
So yeah, good
depending
point.
on what you're doing, having broken it up into more of a successional planting means that the task, you could take out your first two plantings of beans and still have, a decent second or third picking off of your later beans. But if you've planted everything, or everything went out all in one go, or whatever, which a lot of us do, which is totally understandable. Yeah, there comes a point. I definitely, I don't know that I can't remember a time where I've let it go without terminating it myself. Speaks maybe to my control issues or
Mhm.
something, but
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. If somebody's
Yeah,
going to
my
kill this garden,
terms.
it's going to be
It's gonna be me.
You can pry these tomatoes from my cold dead fingers.
It's like my garden memoirs will be the Song of Ice and Fire, but I think it's already taken. I mean, I'm not gonna let the frost get it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna burn it. I'm gonna kill it with fire, people. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm gonna
regardless of whether
terminate.
you
We're
you
gonna
terminate it
terminate.
yourself,
Yeah.
or you let the chilling winds do it for you, do we have some kind of principles or thoughts? I mean, do we just leave everything where it lays and let it go back to the earth and the great cycle of life and death? Or do we find a middle ground, or do we pull everything out and replace all the soil every year, dig everything out with a backhoe? I haven't done that yet.
But like so many times in
Mm.
life and like so many situations, it depends, Brett. It
The
depends. So
the song that comes to mind when I think of garden cleanup is "Down with the
Okay.
Sickness" by
Mm.
Disturbed.
nice.
okay. Yeah.
Um,
Not a surprising
so
choice for you, Alexis.
right. So, but
Now
nobody
I'm
is shocked.
trying not to sing that into my microphone. Sorry.
So my and I say that because there is a reason. Down with the Sickness is what I think about as the priorities for what I'm going to clean up, because whether you're terminating it yourself or you're letting winter terminate it for you, you're probably sick and
Mm.
tired of it in some form or fashion. So if you can kind of hit on it, and then to me, we always say do it before winter comes, or as soon as that frost hits, like go out and do it. But in all honesty, I think if you're doing it within, enough time that you're going to be able to clean it up and have it kind of have a little bit of a rest period before you plant again, I think that's okay. And I say that because in Kentucky, we usually have like a couple warm days in February, and that's one of my favorite times to do garden cleanup. And that and the garden, I'm stumbling, I'm sorry. The kind of garden cleanup I do in February is different from what I would do like right after that termination. And that's where the Down with the Sickness comes in. So my priority is to get rid of anything that had disease, really bad disease or insect pressure first.
Very
Get rid of it,
Darwinian. I like it.
burn it, get it off the property, don't compost it, all those standard things I
Well,
think
hold on,
people
hold
are
on. I don't
said.
know that
And then
that
once
might
I've
not
done
be
that,
familiar to everyone. So yeah.
yeah. Okay, you're right. You're right. So, ideally, we want to, if you know that you had problems, you don't necessarily have to be able to identify the insect or identify the disease, but most of the time we can identify that something is wrong. And so you want to remove those. Usually it's the whole plant, so root and all. If it's insects, unless it's a root bound insect, usually the top ground growth will be enough. But when it comes to disease plants, I typically like to get kind of the whole plant, rip it out, have a good, put on your good metal music and just like rip your stuff out. And any dropping, so with tomatoes, like blight, we get a lot of blight on our tomatoes in the state with our weather, and so removing anything that has fallen, those leaves that have fallen down, just kind of rake up anything that was diseased or had bad insect pressure, bag it in a trash bag and throw it away, or burn it, pretty quickly.
Kill
Don't
it with
wait until
fire.
next spring to do that. Kill it with fire, because those things will overwinter. So those diseases, a lot of them have overwintering structures. Those insects may have laid eggs that are going to overwinter, and they're just going to pop right back up exactly in your garden where they were. So you want to get them off of the property in some way, form, or fashion. And that's kind of my priority. And then I'm about like tired, like I'm done. And I save all those cutting back, all those general, just kind of raking up stuff, maybe putting your stakes away, any sanitizing of my tools. Personally, I'm not saying this is the right thing to do. I'm just saying this is what I do. I like to do that in those February days when you're kind of itching to get out anyways, and you're not so like physically and mentally exhausted most of the time. What about you all?
I don't know. In the garden, from my experience, the way I kind of mess around and piddle around and do things is in the fall is kind of a semi busy time. I mean, not commercial type busy or production type busy, but it's I feel the changing of the season, so I feel like it's a good time to do all those things that you just now mentioned, Alexis. And do other chores, like I think about how I manage my leaves and where the leaves are at and what do I want to do with the leaves. Do I need to do anything with the leaves? How's my compost pile doing? Some of the stuff that was in the garden that wasn't diseased, I love taking that, grinding it just a bit to break it down, throwing it into a compost pile, but I know that I have to manage that through the winter to maintain minimum temperatures. But yeah, all of those things I feel with the coming of the season, and I love the end of a garden season. I don't know why, but it's a break point for me in seasonality. We talked a little bit about seasonality in our last podcast, but yeah, all those things that you just mentioned, I love doing, in the fall. I love the fall time of the year and the shorter days, cooler days. It's more comfortable to work outside. I try to
Yeah.
take garden notes of what worked well, what didn't. And it's surprising how bad my memory is. And I'm like, oh, I had that tomato variety last year. That was excellent. And then I can't remember what it was. And I end up, losing it. So to write those things down, I try to do a little garden journal. If I really love something or if something failed miserably, try to write all those things down to reflect a little bit at the end of the
I
growing
think,
season. Stuff like that.
acknowledging that, thinking of the gardening as it's a circle. It's not like there's no actual beginning and end to the lapse, and you can think of it as starting whenever it's we're coming back around. So there are actually things that we're going to be planting in the fall, or maybe planting in the fall, and so I think of those as sort of like related. So for instance, planting garlic and planting cover crops. If you're going to do annual strawberries, you're going to be likely putting those, or you're going to be putting those in probably September in Kentucky at least. And so I think of those two things as kind of a related moment where you're starting to, just like we had that episode a month or two ago talking about, or yeah, I guess 2 months ago, talking about now's the time when you're sweating like crazy in summer is the time to be thinking about planting for your fall garden. In the same way, if you want to have a nice green, lush cover crop out there that you can look out and see in December of your winter wheat or your rye, cereal rye, or your winter peas or whatever, now is the time to, not now just per se, but this little stretch of time is when to be thinking about planting those things. Another thing that I definitely, from experience, I clean up in the fall as soon as it's done is like cabbage plants, because if you have had the privilege of smelling cabbage plants that have frozen and thawed and frozen and thawed
Sulfur
like a dozen times
compounds.
over the course of winter. It's incredible. The neighbors love it. It's enchanting. It's romantic.
Brett, I
Yeah.
saved some of those things so I could chuck them at my brother. I specifically saved some of the little cabbages, and I'm like, "Ooh, that one's
Yeah.
juicy." And then, oh man, my aim got so good.
Th-
Just chuck it
this
at your
goes
sibling
for
and run.
Totally.
Yeah.
this goes for anything in the brassica family. So
Mhm.
that's your broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage. If you're
Yeah.
flower people,
Kale.
stock is a brassica. So kale,
Stinky.
yeah, they those sulfur
And the thing is,
compounds
it's a
are
little bit later for
ripe
those, so they can
in.
take a little bit of frost, they can take a little bit of cold, but at some point, whenever it's done, when we've decided, I try my best, even if it's cold, to go out and pull those things and get rid of them, just because we live in the city, close by other people. Another thing that I do, and I think it's there's different approaches and different thoughts about it, but so we have now, we used to do it just a big vegetable garden, but now we have a lot of ornamentals, including things like wildflowers and native grasses and some. They're not full on woody. They're herbaceous perennials, but they get kind of woody in the course of growing. So in other words, they die back all the way to the ground and grow from the ground each year, as opposed to a tree, like a tree or a bush that has an above ground structure and it buds off of it. And so with those, I like to, just from a sense of neatness, I like to cut those. However, as we learned from our entomologists and other friends, there's a lot of insects that lay their eggs and overwinter in those, both good and bad seems a bit facile for us, right? There are no good and bad, but mostly beneficials are the ones that I'm worried about. So if I cut those, I will often lay them down in piles right where I cut them, so that once it warms up in the spring and I feel like everything's moved around, I can go and spread those as mulch somewhere else, or I can do something with those. But I do prefer a little bit more neat and orderly rather than this crazy spindly wild thing. And it also makes it easier to see when stuff's coming up in the spring, and I don't see weeds and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So
that's an important one.
those are
Yeah.
some methods.
And we found out with like hardy mums, I guess would fall in that category of what you're talking about. Brett, we're finding out that things like hardy mums, they actually have better winter survivability for whatever reason. Self-mulching, we think, self-insulating, self-mulching, because they tend to catch leaves and debris, and that, kind of mulches the crown. But yeah, some of those things actually do better through the winter if you just leave them, which goes against my nature. I just want to mow everything down, be done with it, so I don't have to see it. Not looking at you, Alexis. But as far as some of these things, it's just better health wise for the plant. Some of these herbaceous perennials or these hardies that can make it through our winter time. They have better.
Some of them
It may shock
evolutionarily they like to burn, like some of the grasses. I did that a couple back when I was bolder and dumber and younger. I did that several times. It is I will say it is a huge vibe, but partially because you feel it feels dangerous. Yeah. So I did that in our suburban backyard, and there was this huge plume of like smoke that went up. But
love it.
I mean, they liked it. They liked it, and I liked it.
A whoosh.
Yeah.
Grasses really respond to that. We used to burn, like, it was one of my favorite memories of Brio. We worked with a lot of native prairie grasses at the Bluegrass Army Depot with a wildlife study I was doing, but we burned like 10, 15 acres at a time.
Yeah.
And it was a rush. It was, buffalo grass and Indian grass. All the plume, exactly what you're saying, bro. I get it. It is. And they do. They absolutely
But now I don't do that
especially.
anymore.
They
I
love
just
that
cut
cycle.
them and bundle them, and they do fine. They don't need it, but yeah. So if you're doing that in your area or you're out somewhere, follow your local ordinances about what you should do with that. Get your burn permit and all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah, I think that I do think that there are recommendations out there to not just mow it or not just not take it out and get rid of it. Some of those, especially the native stuff.
They're in the. I know we're talking about gardens right now on the topic of gardens primarily, but thinking about landscapes, there's lots going on. That you can do August, September, October, getting your landscape ready for winter. And one thing that I stress, and I've just seen so many problems with in my county that I'm at here in Central Kentucky, like some things that we tend to overlook or homeowners tend to overlook is like young, newly planted trees, like a red maple, for instance, that have very thin bark that may be younger, have thinner bark than even normal. That has frost crack, that tends to frost crack in the winter. The sun hits one side of the plant, the rest of it stays asleep. It just destroys the life of that plant. But I mean, there's lots of chores like that we can do as far as wrapping plants in the winter and then
So
removing
can
that in
you
the spring. But what
you
else
said
in
what the
landscapes?
problem
I'm
is, but
trying to think.
what's the thing that you do to it?
There's just different wraps. You can get like commercially prepared like tree wraps to wrap that. It's just important not to leave those wraps on year round because it becomes a safe haven for insects that are not always desirable. But put them on in the fall months. Let them go through the winter. After the last freeze in the spring, you can take those off. But it will save you. It'll save a lot of young trees if you do that. If you've planted like these young thin bark trees, and that the winter sun's going to hit one side of that, typically depending on the location, is to protect that. We can do stuff like that. It's really important in the winter. And I've just seen larger farms where I'd go out and they have 200 red maples, and they're all just the damage occurred 6-8 years ago, but they're just now seeing the fallout of that frost cracking, and they've lost every single tree, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
But just things like
the
that.
wrap kind of, there's a couple things going on there. It's like it's protecting them from those sunny winter days where it warms up too much too quick. But it can also, with younger kind of plants, you're getting that protection of some of the like rabbits and rodents that are like scavenging around in the
Dual purpose,
wintertime.
yeah.
It'll prevent them from chewing and like stripping the bark
The
and stuff like that.
voles, yeah.
Yep.
In some cases, yeah. So stuff like that. I mean, so there are lots of things going on in the landscape. I mean, some bulbs are. I mean, Alexis going to have tons of information on this, I'm sure. Some bulbs homeowners are putting in the ground. Other bulbs, Alexis, I guess, are taking
Tulips,
out.
right?
Yeah.
And
yeah, there's all your bulbs that need a cold period. So your narcissus, your tulips, your fritillaria, stuff like that. Your garlic.
Yeah.
You need that cold period to establish a root system, and getting those in. Honestly, you can get those in. That's the other thing that peonies are another example of this. Kind of anything that has some sort of tuberous, bulbous root system to it. A lot of even our perennials, if they're dormant, so whether that's some sort of more woody perennial like a lilac, or some of like I said, I already mentioned peonies, things like that, but they can go in until the ground freezes is really where it is. And so in Kentucky, some years that's late December before that happens, and I think we can give ourselves a little bit of room for error there. And if you're wanting to get the garden more cleaned up and spend some more time doing that because you've got those fall crops to put in, your cover crop needs to go in earlier than your tulips do. And just kind of thinking about, when's the last minute that I can put this in? And with plants, I feel like it's kind of like that. Like you're always thinking of like, when is the least amount of time I have to take care of this? And so you kind of add that into, we're talking about cleanup, but cleanup can mean, like Brett said, a lot of different things. If we're talking about landscaping, one thing I always forget, and I mention it in my most recent newsletter because I always personally forget, is August, September time, is the time to be pruning your evergreens. And so it's kind of the last time to be pruning your evergreens because you, so that they don't have really tender growth going into winter. And you're also not opening up a wound going into winter. So for those of you out there who maybe have those types of things. And usually we're talking about broadleaf evergreens. So beer boxwoods, azaleas, things like that. And conifers are a lot more room for error with them. But just some things to think about from that perspective, that cleanup can also mean just kind of basic maintenance for some things that
Can
have
I ask
weird times a year to do that.
Question?
No.
What's the
You can
deal
ask.
with
You can
leaves?
ask.
Ooh, I was hoping
somebody
somebody
would
would
bring that up.
Fit, Josh.
Say what?
How much you
I
love
mean, I
leaves.
think there are different sort of strategies for it. I personally don't rake leaves because I'm more interested in protecting my trees in my landscape than my lawn. But if you are very concerned about protecting your turf grass, I believe the recommendation is to not have much more than 20% kind of coverage of leaves to leave on, to not allow them to mat up and create like a layer. Um, but I don't really care about my lawn all that much. I'm more interested in the trees. And I mean, aside from raking them all up, I think one of the better strategies, if you have a mulching mower, is to just mow them in
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's
because
what I
it's
do.
free. It's free
I think
nutrients for the
it
soil.
also helps
You're
to
feeding
not
the
have
soil.
big
But
giant
some people,
leaves that are easy to catch on the wind and blow down and go down into the sewer system. If you live, because that's one of the pushbacks that
sure.
I
Mm.
think is
Yeah,
fair
yeah.
about like not just letting the leaves rock and roll is that it does cause some cloggages
Mm-hmm.
in the
Yeah.
in the sewer system. But yeah, the mulching component, and it also, if you have if anybody's out there's gone down the direction of having a moss lawn or a moss garden, you want to keep the leaves off those as well.
Mm.
Mm,
It'll smother them. Those poor
Mm.
little bryophytes will just not do good under there. They like to have a open view of the stars, just like me.
I mean,
Beautiful.
if you have that many leaves, if you have just an absolute surplus that not even a mulching mower can take care of, hopefully you have a friend, or maybe you personally even have like we talked about just very briefly, compost pile out back
mhm,
Mhm.
to grind those up, and that's the one of the few times I ever use a leaf catcher on the back of my mulching mower is if I either want to use the leaves as grass clippings, as mulch in my garden, or I'm catching leaves in the fall to put in the mulch pile. But I'm still grinding them up so they break down quicker. But then if I have an absolute surplus of them, I'm very fortunate to have enough room in the back just to go throw them in a pile. Because in the wintertime, I'm trying to increase the size of my compost pile so that it'll at least be 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot and self insulate and continue to compost through the winter.
mhm.
And if you're someone who, for whatever reason, we try not to have judgment on this podcast, but for
Mm.
whatever reason needs to bag their leaves, because, maybe you do have that moss lawn. For the love of God, tell a farmer, because I would kill for
I
I've
leaves.
killed
have
for
killed.
lettuce.
I have go no. I will not admit that on a recording, but please,
You just did.
there's somebody who wants them, and it may be your neighbor 5 minutes down the road, but it also might be a farmer. I know lots of farmers who, in my area, we can hoof it to Lexington, which is where UK is located, and there's a lot of suburban area where people are bagging their leaves.
Are you use that for mulch or organic matter or both, Alexis?
Both.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are using it for mulch on more tender
Mhm.
perennials,
Mhm.
but using them also to incorporate into the soil if
Yeah.
they've got bad soil,
It's
whatever it
great for
is.
that.
So I wish there was, like, I don't know, maybe there's a Facebook page out there. I feel like there's a Facebook page for everything, but it's like a donate your leaves, and you
That's a good
put
idea.
where to come
That's a
pick
great
them
idea.
up, because I will come with a truck and trailer and I will take your leaves. But I know a lot of people who will do that. So keep that in mind before that you send them to the landfill, that they can be incorporated back into the system.
Mm.
Mm.
We're all ruminating.
We're all
Y'all
like,
made me
oh,
so
wait.
excited about like fall.
I know.
I wish it was already here.
I know. I'm like, where's my like spiced teas and stuff like that?
What about
Pumpkin
just, I'm
spice
thinking,
latte, is that
the
what you said?
general transition from summer into fall activities, and we've cleaned up and we've pulled
Mhm.
out some of the usual suspects. I think, one thing you said, Alexis, about the disease component, thinking about, like, yes, there are things that maybe have a lot of diseases this year, and that's the ones you definitely want to target to get out. But I also think about who are the susceptible, weak little buddies in the garden year after year, and those are the ones that I would think about protecting as well. So, what are among those the disease, the ones that tend to get disease that we want? What came to mind for me was tomatoes, cucurbits, So that cucurbits, including like things like squash and cucumbers and melons. What else? What are some other like targeted kind of things that are the most, as far as disease? Yeah, carryover.
A carryover. I mean, if you take that logic to the very end, just about every garden crop that I know of has the potential to have issues, either whether or not it's a disease carryover or it's a yummy spot for insects that bother that crop. So it's either a disease related issue or an insect related issue. If you take into account both of those, it's if you leave things unattended and in its au naturel state, which it's not always a bad thing, but it can lead to long term problems, especially if you don't have a rotation in place. It could affect just about everything in the garden because you're managing those annuals. For the most part, garden crops are mostly annuals.
Yeah.
You manage those intensively, and you have
And
to
then
worry about both
also,
insects and diseases.
so I'm thinking too, like this time of year, cover crops, there's this window, kind of now in August through maybe November for some of the really late planted stuff. There are windows sometimes for some of those cover crop. That's another component of this time of year. And you could think of that as cleaning up, in the same way that like making your bed is cleaning up in a way. It is different from cleaning up than like, cleaning the kitchen or something.
Related to that question, Brad, is like it's clean, it's garden cleanup, but like potatoes. I got a question the other day and I had to think about it. It was like, well, how long can we leave the potatoes in the ground after the frost has killed the top of the plants? And that's a form of cleanup. I never looked at it that way. And my stock answer is usually about 2 weeks, depending on if the weather is not too terribly wet. I don't want to dig potatoes at the end of the season, but they ask the question in the form of, well, it's garden cleanup, but we want to leave them there as long as possible. I don't know what the reasoning for that was, but I thought that was interesting. But yeah, 2 weeks, about 2 weeks after the frost has killed the top of the crop, thinking about, letting the frost terminate the crop. It can still remain in there safely, usually 10 to 14 days, unless you just have absolutely waterlogged soil. But they asked that because they were asked in a garden cleanup, form. So I thought that was interesting as far as that. But I'm trying to think of any other crops that are like that.
Dahlias.
Affect, I mean, dahlias. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
dahlias are tuberous. They're actually edible as well, in case you didn't know, the edible tubers. But the dahlias, the running recommendation for them has always been wait till a hard freeze when the top growth is, black the next morning. That's when you can. And you've got, like Ray said, about 2 weeks where that soil is still going to be usually plenty warm, sometimes longer if you're getting an early freeze and then it warms back up like it does a lot. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to wait.
Yeah.
So that was always, and the reason why that's recommended for dahlias, and I would say it's pretty similar to things like sweet potatoes or regular potatoes, is because they get a cure down in there. So once that top growth is done, that's a signal to the plant. It's not photosynthesizing and putting sugars back into those tubers. And so what it naturally is going to do is create a thicker skin, which for storage purposes, they're going to store better when they have a thicker skin. But if you do pull them out ahead of time, they can develop that thicker skin by allowing them to kind of dry out, but you're going to have to be a little bit more careful about your storage down in there. But sometimes, you just need to get them out. There's just the way the weather's going to work. If it's going to be wet and they're going to rot, you can pull them out early. So that's all. I feel like fall is just such a timing game, and like I said, what can you push to the last minute and what can you fit in between there that has to be done. And it's all about just kind of prioritizing. And that's where prioritize the disease. If you don't get those perennials cut back, that's just, it's an aesthetic thing. So think about like what could die or what am I going to lose if I don't do it? Put those first. Is my soil going to wash away if I don't get this cover crop down? Those kinds of things are really, and I make a list because I like lists. We all know I like lists. I like to cross things off my list.
For those uninitiated to the cut flower game,
helpful.
With the dahlias, you are talking about a practice that's sometimes called lifting. Is that what that's called? So the idea is that in our climate, they're not going to be hardy if you leave them out over the winter. And so around here, at least, or maybe it's not just around here. I just am familiar with around here. You're digging those up, and whereas with a potato, you'd make yourself a nice baked potato or a nice hash brown. With those, you're keeping them in some sort of a storage environment that's climate controlled according to, and then to
Climate
replant them
controlled,
next
right.
year. Is it true?
Right,
Is it true? Are there some places where you don't have to do that?
So right. So if your soil temperatures, well, I mean, from experience, I've overwintered them, but it's not in just like normal conditions like they were growing in. It took excessive mulch, it took silage tarps to keep the water moisture off of them. So it's not just always temperature, but always also moisture. But yes, in some more southern climates, they're native to, I think, Mexico. So they're a perennial there, and a lot of our annuals are perennials in other places. Poinsettia is a native of Mexico, and it is a tree down there. If you've never seen one, it's really cool to see. What we think about is his little table plants as pretty much just giant trees.
They got big tables
down there, but yes, so we got big old
Big
tables. So it is dependent on your climate, and even in the state of Kentucky, what's the tip. Northern Kentucky is a different climate, a whole different climate than areas in southwest Kentucky. Very different climate than the mountains in eastern Kentucky. So you just kind of have to know.
What about
you can get away with.
digging and dividing things? What's the play on that? Am I gonna wait till spring? Am I gonna I know that there's different genres of plant that you might be doing that with.
Yeah, there's not. I don't know. Maybe for garlic, I'm trying to think of like what vegetable you might be dividing to get those of you in the vegetable world who might be doing this. But peonies you divide.
What time in the fall? Like September? Okay.
If you right now, August, September, even into early October, if you're going to divide any of your perennials. Sedum, I just talked about sedum recently with someone, and is a really great one that divides
Sedum
really well. Peonies can be divided really well. Pretty much any sedum, if you got them, any perennial that's not woody, that doesn't have that kind of woodier base at the bottom, can most of the time, rule of thumb, be divided. And I take a nice shovel out.
And so you're doing that when there's still foliage on the plant. Like my peonies have leaves.
Divide them. Yeah, you can do. So peonies are. It's funny. I always think we tend to think of them as these really like dainty, very delicate flowers and plants. But man, they're hardy. They grow them in Alaska. I mean, Alaska has a whole peony season. That's my dream, to go see them in Alaska. But peonies are super hardy. It's hard to mess them up and kill that plant. At worst, it won't bloom. But you can really do those from the time the foliage kind of is starting to color for the fall. Through dormancy.
We're looking at you, Himmercallis. I mean, just some plants.
Daylilies, yeah.
Yeah, some plants are just, they have that tolerance for, doing it with. I mean, technically, I guess biologically, if you're adhering to the super sound principles, if in doubt, I guess, Brett, what you're getting at and thinking of would be, one of the good times to divide things would be when it's physiologically no longer putting energy into that storage device, that root structure, the underground structure. And if you just don't know, like Alexis has this wealth of information in her head and knows what she can, do early divisions with and what she can't. Well, if you don't know, then you can wait until the top, subsides. Where the plant's kind of shutting down, going into a semi-state of dormancy. And at that point, you're pretty safe to do some of these things because the plant is less active.
Yeah, when in doubt, just wait till it shuts down. Again, that's like gives you time. If you've done what you need to do and you want to start dividing now, you can. But if you get caught up in other things, you can still wait and do it. As long as the ground is not
Alexis
frozen,
is in the mindset of like, I got a bunch of tasks. Where can I fit them into my schedule? Right. I mean, that's the reality, right? I mean, it's like in a, prepping in a kitchen. It's like anything you're doing it professionally. Whereas like, I'm thinking, I have 6 and it would be cool to turn them into 12. Like that's my mentality. And so for me, I would probably
Yeah.
wait until they were dormant because there's not another thing that I need to. That's my fun
Mhm.
time, you know.
Yeah. 12 other irons
Yeah.
in the fire. Yeah.
I guess I think
Mm.
about
Yeah,
I
totally.
have a lot of friends who are moms, and so I'm also thinking about them, like, it is their
Yep.
them time, but how often do they get that too? So it might be not that you have a ton of farming or gardening
Yeah,
tasks to do.
totally.
You just might have a lot of crap to do. And so you can, fit that in when
And
they're
don't
at.
forget, at the end of the season, we're talking about like divisions now, but another form of multiplying plants would be seed savers. We don't have a lot of time left on this episode to get
Mm-hmm.
into it, but it may be a great one for the future. But now is a great time to be thinking about that. If you've not done that, maybe that's a good upcoming episode. But I'll put that bug in your ear. Is that it's a great time that if you are a seed saver, some crops lend themselves, open pollinated crops lend themselves very well to saving the seeds. And I've worked with a lot of seed savers over time, home gardeners that have, seeds of their favorite tomato that they've saved for time out of the mind. They have no idea what the actual true variety of that or cultivar of the tomato is, but they've saved it for so long that they just keep saving it. But it's a time of year to begin thinking about that. As things ripen and physiologically mature, that's when you want to save the seeds of these best, most perfect fruits that were the most thrifty, the best growers, the most disease free. Now's the time of year to be thinking about that.
Yeah, and along those lines, like especially the fruiting ones where the seeds are within it, this is when you pick a plant that and say let that one go all the way to seed, as they
Yes.
say. Don't
Oh,
harvest
Way,
it to
baby.
eat it. Let it
One
go
more
all the way.
set of
Yeah.
questions, and this can be just real
And-
straightforward. Fall, spring, do it now or wait. Thinking about like planting perennials, things like shrubs, things like fruit trees, things like non-flowering trees or perennials of those sorts. What's the extension go-to line?
Mm-hmm.
I really, evergreens in the spring is my preference to avoid winter burn. But I love the deciduous trees and shrubs this time of year because historically, on average, we have cooler temps, more moisture available this time of year. And if you put that plant in the ground, at a time where it's going to go into dormancy, it's a good time to do it
Mhm.
for the deciduous trees and shrubs.
Yeah, for Kentucky people, plant those things in the fall. I think
Mhm.
because there's like the Arbor Day Foundation will tell you spring, like Arbor Day is in the spring, and I think that throws a lot of our people off because Arbor Day is from like we've talked about this before, like North Dakota or I don't know, somewhere where they have cold winters and not nearly as hot as summers. So, good rule of thumb, if you have hot summers and your winters are relatively speaking mild as far as throughout the country, you want to plant those
And that
deciduous perennials in
again,
the fall.
just to be
Yeah.
blunt, so those things are going to have leaves on them when I plant them, or they're not going to have leaves on them when I plant them.
It depends on the species, but it may not, and that's fine.
In Kentucky, I mean, if you wait to the point to where it doesn't have leaves on it, the ground's probably because you want to dig the ground not in a wet condition because you're going to destroy soil texture. So a lot of times you're putting that maple tree in the ground when it has leaves on it, but it's getting ready for winter. So it's not going to have a lot of growth needs at that point. And we're doing it at that time. We don't want to get it too far into the winter in Kentucky because sometimes the ground just turns wet, stays wet. That's not a good time to dig. You want to dig the ground when it's fairly workable, fairly dry. So that's why a lot of times we're planting trees such as a maple, for example, in the fall when it does have a few leaves on it, because it's at a point where the ground still, we can
So if
dig a
I'm
good hole
itching to do this
get it
stuff
planted
August,
the correct way.
September, maybe into October, go for it. If it gets
Yeah,
into
maybe
November,
November, depending on the
December,
weather.
then that might be the turning point to maybe wait till the spring.
Problematic. It could be problematic, especially with some species, more so than others. I forget specific examples, but you can have some frost heaving issues in certain instances, depending on the size of the tree.
I would say if you haven't purchased the plant yet or divided it yet, then it's better to wait. But if it's something that like you bought it thinking you were going to plant it in September and now it's the end of November and
Nice.
Thanksgiving is rolled around and you've not done it yet, plant it.
Mm-hmm.
And plant it with and mulch it heavily.
Yeah.
Make sure
mulch.
you're doing that donut mulching we talked about in the
Donut
mulch episode. If you don't know
volcano.
what that is, go
Do
listen to the
donut.
mulch episode.
Well, or
Donut.
sorry, wait, no. Do not.
And
Sorry,
the mulch
do not
doesn't keep it from
volcano.
freezing.
Do
Do
donut. Do
Do not.
Donut
Yeah, I like it.
volcano.
The
Don't eat
spin.
don't eat volcanoes, eat donuts.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's all about food.
It's all about food. So yes, I would say if you have like a plant that needs to be planted,
Yeah,
plant
that's
it.
awesome.
in
And
the
I think
ground now.
the thing you all said earlier about
Or in the fall.
or that you said about peonies, with a lot of plants. I mean, not all of them, but many of them are pretty tough and like they want to survive. Yeah, exactly. They just
Plants
want to live, sir.
Yeah. They just want
Well,
to
I really
live.
appreciate you all just
Can I have
answering
some
all of my
more?
questions. Luckily, we recorded it for the podcast, but this was all just me being selfish ultimately.
It's just the Brett show. We're just here.
I have one more question, and I got to answer this.
I thought you were going to say you were going to
returned this
ask it
client's
and
phone
answer it.
call
I was
yet.
like, that's a
And
baller
I've done
move.
it. No, I'm going to ask it, and you guys are going to answer it.
All-time
Because I
move.
suspect you guys are going to have some experience with this. I bet you. But broad forks, which I love. But do you have a preference? Speaking of putting gardens to bed and working the soil and getting it ready, do you guys have a preference for like how you use broad forks as far as breaking up hard pans? Spring, fall, what? I mean, as far as working, any time's a
As
good time to
needed.
break up a hard pan. As needed. Okay. That's what I needed to know.
Usually before planting. So if you're doing a fall planting, then you're going to
that
want
was
a
what my
broad fork
mind went
before
to. Is
planting.
like, so if
Yeah,
you're broad forking for the benefit of aeration for the plants you're going to put in, I would do it as close to the planting as I could. That's my thinking, at least.
Yeah.
Right. What if you're broad forking just
broad
for
fork
the love
every
of the
day,
game?
baby.
Just for good arm muscle.
Broad fork every
Throw it out
day.
there. And with
Broad
that,
fork your neighbor's lawn.
if you don't know what a
whatever.
broad fork is, Google it. It's an awesome tool. It's a hand tool, and it breaks up hard pans, which we see hard pans a lot in home gardens because of garden tillers go down 6 to 8 inches on average, and creates a hammered hard pan that water and roots or anything else can't go to if you till at the same depth every year. And these broad forks are these wonderful tools that go down and kind of help break that up depending on the design of the fork.
It's almost
So,
like a
great
hand
pieces of
tool,
equipment.
subsoiler,
But I've
splater
seen
kind of that doesn't pulverize the soil. It kind of lifts and separates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just creates channels.
And in the fall, as I more lift, sometimes I'm breaking up a hard pan. But even if I don't have a hard pan in the fall, I am lifting the soil to increase that aerification and everything, and water penetration over the winter. And then that kind of pulverizes up, and it seems like you can get some benefits not related to hard pans, but just soil structure, just letting that go through the winter. And then as I'm planting things, man, they're so good right before you plant. When you break it, you get that nice deep planting bed. So yeah, thank you guys.
All right, well, we're gonna wrap this up. We've gone on because we're just so excited about garden prep. But anyways, we hope that you all have learned some stuff, maybe have been inspired on what you need to be doing for fall cleanup or fall, whether that's cover cropping or dividing or, just making sure that you pull your disease plants out so that you don't have as much of an issue the following year. Give yourself a little bit of time. This is, I think the consensus is that fall, there's some things that need to be done before the dead of winter, and there's some things you can wait and do in the dead of winter. And so give yourself a little bit of break, a little bit of room to get through those things. It all comes with good time. If you want to contact us so that we can open your mail on the pod, you can send us an email at hortculturepodcast@l.uky.edu. You can also shoot us a message on Horticulture Pod, which is our Instagram account. We would love if you would leave us a review and just let us know if you've been enjoying it. Hopefully you won't leave us a review if you've been hating it, but I guess
if you leave a negative review, make sure you put your
be able
address.
to do that.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah. We'll change your mind. We'll
send you
minds.
plants in the mail. But anyways, we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and that you will join us next week for more planty goodness. Have a great one, y'all.